Un instante. Vale. Pues thank you very much for inviting me. Como has dicho, luego al final si queréis hacer preguntas en castellano o portugués, sin problema. Pero para dar la charla creo que es mejor en inglés para todos, si no voy a hablar mi portuñol. So I'll give the talk in English because my Spanish is a bit mixed with Portuguese, so it's better for everyone if it's in English. I think will be clear. So I'm going to talk a little bit about product teams and why do they need family or support, if you like. And I have two small boys. One is 3-year-old and the other is 5. And sometimes when I see them, how the dynamics between them and with other people as they grow up, reminds me of certain dynamics in the organizations and in the workplace. So I'm Manuel Paes. I've been working in the industry for about 20 years in different roles. And I've done the last 5 to 6 years, I've been consulting around DevOps, continuous delivery, and I co-wrote the book Team Topologies with Matthew Skelton. And so most of what you're going to hear today is coming from the ideas from the book Team Topologies. And so when we're talking about teams, I like this quote from John Cutler, which maybe some of you are familiar with his work. He's very active on social media and blogs a lot. So he's on product management side, but he has a lot of interest in team dynamics, organization dynamics, and so on. And so he's saying that great products emerge from empowered, fully cross-functional teams. And this is kind of an idea that has been gaining momentum, if you like, over the years. And people realize more and more that if you have teams that are able to own kind of the end-to-end life cycle of the services or applications that they deliver, that really is the best way to bring in quickly the feedback from the runtime and feedback from customers and make the product the best it can be and make it a good fit for what your customers need. At the same time, there's a kind of trend going on at the moment of this idea of moving from project orientation to product orientation. And so it's the idea of organizing ourselves according to the value streams, if you like, or the products that we're trying to offer to our customers rather than based on projects and delivery of outputs. We're focusing on a continuous flow of work along the product lines and the value streams. And so there are different organizations talking about this and trying to engage in this transformation from Nationwide. It's kind of a mid-sized insurance company in the US. They have very interesting talks, but BMW as well here in Europe, talking about moving from projects to products. Barclays Bank or parts of Barclays Bank have been doing that as well. So it's interesting because the benefits are becoming clear, but it's still quite hard if you think about it. There's a lot of changes that you would need to do in terms of how financing works, the budgeting, the planning, human resources, the actual, even the actual layout. If you go back, if we go back to the office at some point, and also what I wanted to remember a little bit is that actually the idea of DevOps, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the original problem they was trying to address was the silos, right? The idea that we have different teams working, they might be doing their best work, but if they're, restricted to some functional silo, we're only doing the testing, or we're only doing the operations, or we're only doing the development. It's going to be always local optimization, and they don't have an end-to-end view of what the customers need, what's the best way, and what's a faster way to get the delivery of the value that the customers need. And so DevOps actually came about. Yes, it was more focused on development and operations, but it's the idea of crossing these boundaries between silos. And kind of the basic idea, the basic premise was to get teams to collaborate and actually know each other and work together on common problems that they had around deployment, monitoring, performance, etc. And then this extended to other teams in the organization, QA, testing, security, etc. And also, in the last years, we've had a lot of research being done around this, not only around good delivery practices and what distinguishes high-performing from lower-performing teams. So if you're familiar with the State of DevOps report that has been coming out for the past 4 or 5 years, I think, and the Accelerate book, which kind of condenses that research and the analysis into what are the practices, the metrics, and the culture that distinguishes high-performing teams from lower-performing teams. And kind of one of the key conclusions from this research is that if we can actually get almost a single team, that kind of product team, to have the required skills to do their work and own the actual service end-to-end, then that's one of the things that distinguishes high-performing organizations and allows them to deliver faster with better quality and so on. And so we could take this and say, well, if that works really well, then why don't we just kind of scale to however many products or services we have? And I've seen some examples of startups trying to do this, and it works in the beginning, but there's a limit to how much you can scale this, because then you start to actually starts costing in terms of when you start scaling and you're repeating a lot of work across multiple teams or across multiple groups, then obviously that's a cost you're incurring. So basically there's this limit to scale, just scaling product teams, this kind of cross-functional teams with all the skills they need. It's not really pragmatic to think that we can just keep doing that. There are many problems. One of them is finding the right people, or training all the people to have all these cross-functional competences and so on. So in Team Topologies, the book that I co-wrote, we talk about different obstacles that we see when we're trying to increase the flow of delivery. And what we've seen from our experience and looking at other organizations' experience, that those kind of cross-functional teams are not kind of this solution to everything. Yes, they're an important part, but there are other things that we need to address. And so today we're going to be looking mostly at how do we help this product teams, cross-functional teams, if you like, to really be able to deliver at speed and with the necessary competences. So we're going to look mostly at this options. It's also related to the fact that we need to stop, or we should be stopping this big reorganization around, well, now we're going to be agile or we're going to be DevOps, because we've seen that, yes, there are some benefits, but there are a lot of disadvantages as well. And typically the results in the end are not what people expected to start with. So any kind of big bang reorganization where we change everything and we expect to get to this end state where everything is fine, that's not very realistic in a way. What we need is organizations that are much more adaptive, like kind of living organisms that will change as the needs change around them. So when we're talking about fast flow and we're talking about, flow slows down or is blocked, this is often caused by handovers between teams. If I have development teams that have to wait on an infrastructure team to respond to their requests or tickets, whenever work leads one team to another team and there's this wait time, we're starting to slow down the flow. And the other team that is taking this work has to schedule it, has to arrange it according to their priorities. And so you start having this, let's say in the worst case, you start having this escalation where one team is asking the other, when are you going to be able to deliver this to you, because we're waiting. and the other team perhaps, and often it's not because of bad intent, but perhaps they're firefighting a lot of problems with in other services, and they can't really prioritize the work that your team needs as a development team. And so in the worst case scenarios that I've seen, this leads to kind of problems, in conflicts between teams and escalation to managers and things like this. But even when there's a good culture around, if you have this kind of handover of work, then you're going to slow down the flow. So we're going to deliver less and less frequently. And there are studies that show that up to 85% of the time it takes to deliver some functionality might be lost in wait time. Is obviously the development team might start working on something else, but the feature is still waiting, the feature that we wanted to move all the way to production. And this can happen even if we have, for example, a cloud team. It depends a lot on how that cloud team is behaving. No one denies the relevance of cloud and being able to scale and easily create new resources and so on. But if the cloud team is behaving as a gatekeeper, like in the previous example, and obviously these are all examples, it's not meant to specifically talk about infrastructure, but as an example. Like I said, if the cloud team is also gatekeeper and any changes, any kind of non-trivial changes have to go through this team, then we still have this handover, still have dependencies that are slowing flow. On the other hand, if the cloud team is actually focused on how do we make it easier for development teams to create new environments, to control the costs of those environments, perhaps. So if they're focused more on that kind of macro aspect, if you like, rather than on the specific projects and applications, then they can have a much more enabling role rather than gatekeeping and controlling. And other examples, typical component teams where I say, well, this component is used by many services, so it makes sense to have a team around it to own it. And in theory, that makes sense, but in practice, if there's a lot of demand around this component and many requests from different development teams, then this will quickly become a bottleneck. And again, slowing down the flow, because all these different development teams are going to have to wait on the component team to coordinate, to schedule, and to respond to their needs. Feature teams, another example. It's interesting because perhaps in some cases feature teams allow delivering faster because you're saying, well, this team is going to be able to change whatever parts of the system are needed to deliver this feature. But then you start having problems more when you need to respond quickly to problems and when you need to coordinate releases and give support quickly, because then you start having issues around who owns which code, how do we diagnose, where is this problem coming from? So the flow might be diminished more in the later cycles of iterating over features and solving issues rather than the initial feature delivery. In short, what we're saying is that if we have many handovers, this can actually almost kill the flow and of delivery. And so what we want to do instead is kill the handovers, right? So that we have better flow. And I find it interesting in this presentation from BMW that I mentioned before, they're specifically talking about that they want end-to-end responsibility of teams to avoid handovers, to reduce handovers. So they clearly acknowledge that this is a key problem for them to be able to deliver faster. So what we're talking about when I mentioned the product teams and cross-functional teams and having this kind of end-to-end ownership where they take an idea or a feature or request all the way to the live environments. So they deploy them, they run them, they monitor them. And this is what allows getting rich feedback from the users, from the runtime into the next iterations. So this is closely related to why John Cutler was saying that this type of teams is what allows great products to emerge. Kind of the elephant in the room, if you like, here is what Peter Newmark was saying, that if you want to be cross-functional, one of the problems that these teams often face is lacking necessary competences. So if we think about what we expect a regular delivery team competences to be, we probably would include this, coding, testing, being able to deploy, understand continuous delivery, pipelines, etc. But we're asking more and more from these teams. We're asking them, well, you should understand infrastructure as code, for example. You should, understand CI/CD, already mentioned. Understand how the performance, the runtime, how to diagnose and respond to problems in production. Security, of course, also having more and more focus by delivery teams, being able to identify vulnerabilities and making sure there's the services and applications meet at least kind of a minimum criteria before they go into production. But if you look at all this, it's still, in order to build the product right, is assuming we have the right ideas around what the product should be and what our customer needs are. So if we actually want to have proper product management and product development, we need a lot more skills even around the viability of products, understanding the metrics of what makes a good product and how customers are behaving, the usability, of course, the user experience, and so on, and the proper kind of quality assurance approach, which encompasses more than just testing. And with all this, then you also get to not only build the product right, but build the right product, be able to iterate and to measure and analyze and get to product market fit, if you like. So again, we're saying we want teams to have more autonomy, to be more cross-functional, but at the same time, they need the competences. Those are kind of the building blocks, right? If they don't have the necessary competences to do that, what's going to happen if we ask them to do all these different aspects of the work in the life cycle is that they're probably going to take shortcuts. They're going to do whatever they can to meet those requests, but they're basically being asked to do too much, right? So how do we alleviate this kind of tension between increasing team autonomy to increase the flow of delivery and avoiding or addressing the lack of competences that actually might decrease flow? Because if we're taking shortcuts, we're going to get into problems later. And that's kind of the idea of the title, that product teams need a family too. They need a support system that helps them to navigate and evolve and learn in a more effective way. They can't just be left to their own devices to, well, now you're autonomous cross-functional team and just find out how you should do things. That's not really pragmatic. It's not really possible. So what we would like to have is less this kind of hard team dependencies, so those handovers that we talked about before, where the flow stops because we are transferring the work between teams, and move towards soft dependencies where we say, well, these teams need help with certain capabilities, certain skills. So how can we organize other teams around them to promote that and support them? This is what we talk about as the 4 fundamental topologies. So the stream-aligned team is essentially that type of product team, cross-functional team I was talking about. And I'm going to talk about the 3 other types of teams throughout the rest of this presentation. So product team, as I talked about before, is the same as what we call stream-aligned team. So the reason why we didn't call them product teams is that first, product is an overloaded term, and we have more and more complicated systems with a lot of different types of technology involved. So if you think about IoT with cloud backends, with mobile apps that control the physical devices, all these things, then the definition of a product is kind of blurry. And also, you cannot say that one team is going to be able to own the whole system, the whole product very often. So we talk about streams of work aligned to business areas instead. But in terms of the nature of the team and the capabilities or the goals of the team is the same as the product team. So the stream-aligned teams, if you like, are kind of the heart of the delivery of value to customers, if you like. And then the other fundamental topologies help reduce the cognitive load that's being asked from the stream-aligned teams, the amount of effort that's being asked from them. So we're going to see how that happens. So my kids, obviously, being small, they do a lot of mess sometimes. And in a way, as we're learning and growing, this kind of product teams also need to be allowed to make mistakes, try out things that are not going to work as well, or going to cost more than we hoped that it would cost, and that's okay. We need to have a culture that allows those teams to make mistakes as long as they're learning from them and evolving. So that's kind of a precondition, if you like. And one of the reasons why, as I said, we cannot expect teams to just gain all the competences by themselves, is also because we're putting too much cognitive load on them. So cognitive load, I'm guessing, rings a bell in some way to everyone, but there's a specific definition from a psychologist called John Sweller back from 1988, where he says cognitive load is total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. More interestingly, is that we can define different types of cognitive load. So from the point of view of software delivery team, there is intrinsic cognitive load. So imagine we're developing some application in Java. If perhaps I'm a junior developer, or I have, I took a break for 6 months and I come back and I don't remember how do I define a class in Java, that's going to take some of my working memory, right, to remember that, or Google, or look at previous code. So intrinsic cognitive loads, everything that's related to the tasks we need to execute on a kind of daily almost basis. And so if we don't have those skills, or it's, we forgot, then that's going to take up some of our working memory. And if we don't have the skills, then we know there are many ways to address that. Obviously, kind of classical training, but also pair programming, mentoring by senior engineers, even mob programming are all ways in which we can help different people in the teams upskill and reduce the intrinsic cognitive load. So it's kind of everything related to the skills. And then there's extraneous cognitive load. So this is everything that all the tasks that I need to do or need to happen to deliver value, to deliver the work, but are not directly related to the problem I'm trying to solve. So if I have to remember every time, how do I deploy this application, or how do I access where is the test environment? How do I get in the test environment? How do I clean up the test data? Whatever it might be, these are extraneous tasks that if I have to think about and remember how to do them, that's taking up working memory again. And finally, there's germane cognitive load. So imagine I'm working in a electronic banking application, then I'll probably need to know how bank transfers work, right? So if I don't, then that's taking up space of my working memory. And what we want to do, now that we know kind of the different types of cognitive load, is we want to minimize intrinsic cognitive load through the techniques I mentioned before. We want to minimize extraneous cognitive load, hopefully by reducing significantly how much the teams have to know about those superfluous tasks, if you like, or those tasks that are not directly related to the value that I'm trying to deliver. And finally, we can improve the amount of working memory that we have available to focus on kind of the business domain and problems that we want to solve, or the solutions we're looking for. Dan North, whose talks are always very popular and funny, he talks about, in one of his talks around microservices, that kind of the size of the microservice should be so that it fits in your head. You can, reason about it. So when we take that to looking from a team perspective, we could say that it's software that fits in our heads should be kind of the size that the team is responsible for. The size of the software the team is responsible for needs to meet their capacity, their cognitive capacity. So I mentioned the book Accelerate, and there are 4 key metrics they talk about. And so that's lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore and change fail percentage. And if you think about teams that have too much cognitive load, typically all of these metrics that identify high-performing teams are going to go down, are going to be negatively affected, because it's going to take us longer to understand the change and to understand what I need to modify to make the change, and understand possible impact on other parts of the software we're responsible for. So that will reduce how often we are able to deploy. And if we have problems in production, it's probably going to take us longer to diagnose, because we don't have such a good picture of the size and the entirety of the software that we're responsible for. And typically the change fail is going to increase, because we're probably going to have more issues around making changes that we didn't understand the impact on other parts of the software. And so we want to reduce the cognitive load on stream-aligned teams or product teams, or we want to make sure what their load is realistic, effective. So one of the ways that I talked about is with these fundamental topologies, other types of teams. So one of them is platform team, which I assume is something familiar to many people. Sometimes platform is also a bit overloaded word, so we have to be careful what we mean by that. But essentially what they should be doing is abstract kind of lower level services that we need in the delivery, things like monitoring, infrastructure provisioning, logging, all these services that we know, well, all the product teams are going to need them to do their work effectively. And so if we can provide those in a self-service way, easy to consume, then we're going to help reduce the cognitive load on the product teams or the stream teams. I like to make an analogy to feeding as a service when I need to feed my my small kids. Well, only the smallest one now that needs help sometimes. So kind of providing the services that are essential in a way that's easy to consume reduces how much we need to think about it every time we need to deploy or monitor or provision infrastructure, etc. I mentioned platforms, and we need clarity around what a platform means. We're not talking about kind of the platforms of the past. At least, like I said, in 20 years, I've seen this kind of black box platforms where teams would go off and, well, we're going to work on this service. We'll come back in a couple of months or in 6 months, and you'll have this service. I'm guessing many of you have seen this, and what happens when they come back? The service is not easy to use, doesn't meet the needs of the teams, or those needs might have evolved meanwhile. And the teams end up being forced to use a platform which doesn't really help them. It actually puts more burden on them if it's difficult to understand and use. So we're talking more about the platform as in this definition from Evan Butcher, digital platform as essentially a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, libraries, whatever it might be, but also the knowledge and support around it that makes it a compelling internal product. So this means that we need a team essentially to run this platform services, or multiple teams depending on the size of platform, and also that it's an internal product, and as such, the adoption should be voluntary. We should not be imposing this platform services on the teams. The stream teams should adopt them because they feel it meets their needs and reduces their workload. So good platform needs to be treated as a product. So it needs to be reliable. We can't have services that, sometimes are up, sometimes are down, or have many issues that are not addressed. It needs to be usable and fit the purpose of the stream teams. So we expect the interactions between platform teams and stream teams to be much more collaborative when we're developing new services. And once we have the services available, in this kind of self-service way, then the platform team should also invest in the stability, reliability of those services. And so it's a much more customer-driven approach for developing platforms. And this means the platform teams, we need very strong product management. In fact, we need very similar skill set to the stream teams, those cross-functional teams, except that we're working on a platform that provides value to internal customers, which are the other teams. Another type of team that we find is necessary often are enabling teams. So these are typically a group, often small teams of experts in some domain. So you could think about, continuous delivery perhaps, or test automation, or data management, whatever it might be that many teams or several teams are struggling with, or security as an enabling team as well, for example. And so instead of expecting or trying that each stream team has their own experts around all these different areas, what we can do is have an enabling team that essentially orbits around the stream-aligned teams. It brings the knowledge to them in an effective way, and therefore reduces the learning curve and the time it takes to acquire those competences. So it's, if you like, a little bit like training wheels, just helping the teams learn much faster. And this can be done through, different ways, either, workshops with the teams, or pairing with people in the stream teams to work through some examples. How do I automate this scenario for, with the desktop client or with the mobile app, whatever it might be. And helping them also select tooling, understand what's available in terms of tools and frameworks, what is a good fit for the team needs, and so on. So it really helps the stream teams acquire those competences in a much more targeted way. And often people ask, isn't that what communities of practice are doing, or the guilds, if you like, in the Spotify way of speaking? And those help address and bring to light some issues, and help create networks of people that are working similar domains, but they're not targeted enough usually. It ends up being left to the teams to actually find out, which tools, what are the good practices around certain domains, because you need kind of more dedication. You need those enabling teams to actually have the time to research and find out, what's coming up next. Because the product teams typically, or stream teams typically, already overloaded with demand in terms of delivering value, deliver features, plus all these new competences that they're expected to acquire. And finally, the third type of supporting topology, if you like, are complicated subsystem teams. These are typically when you have, these are not very common, and you should actually try to avoid them. So this might happen when you have part of a system that is quite complicated, that requires sometimes people with PhD type of understanding of that domain to be able to change it. So we're talking about, for example, face recognition, video processing, real-time financial trading, or very complex mathematical algorithms, which by themselves require a team to have enough bandwidth and availability to understand and work on those subsystems, if you like. And so typically in those cases, we're going to need a team around it. But we want to avoid that this becomes that kind of component team anti-pattern. So we need to be mindful of the kind of the cadence of change on this complicated subsystem. And so that's why we say you should try to avoid them. And I would say 95% of organizations do not need complicated subsystem teams because those have that danger of actually creating some bottlenecks. But there are situations, and I work at an organization where we had, face recognition module, and it did not make sense for the product teams to actually have to understand that. It would take just too much effort. So it's kind of like if I can't ask my 3-year-old to tie his shoelaces yet. He's, it's at the moment it's unrealistic expectation for his kind of knowledge level. Hopefully over time, and face recognition is an interesting example where over time some of these complicated subsystems tend to become utilities. So face recognition, now they're offerings by different providers, and it becomes less of a need to develop in-house. So over time, you might see that, okay, we can rely more on third parties and actually have thinner layer around that to provide what we need for our internal systems around that complicated domain or subsystem. So try to avoid those, but we had to acknowledge that sometimes you do need them in order, again, the critical factor is to keep the cognitive load on the product or stream teams reasonable, matching their capacity, because we know teams have a limited size. We know 7 ± 2 are kind of generally the ideal size of teams working in knowledge work. So we also talk about not just the types of teams, but also the interaction mode. So I mentioned briefly for platform teams that they need to collaborate. So that's one of the interaction modes where we have 2 teams working together to discover some solution to a problem. But we're talking about being more intentional about this. We're talking about having a specific purpose. Why are these 2 teams collaborating and for how long? Then we have at the bottom right, you see facilitating. That's kind of the primary interaction mode for enabling teams. They're facilitating knowledge. They're helping the stream teams kind of upskill and gain the competences and bridge those gaps in their skill set. And finally, in the middle, you see X as a service. And that's typically or often for those platform services or complicated subsystem as a service, if you like, if it's a kind of a running service with an API perhaps around this complicated subsystem. If those are stable, they're easy to understand by other teams, then we get to X as a service kind of interaction, where we actually have one team providing and the other consuming. So there's not actual need to, you don't expect that the teams need to be actually interacting very much. So that's kind of the summary of collaboration, access, service, and facilitating. The key thing here is to be much more explicit about what type of interaction are we engaging in and why, for how long. So with the topologies interaction modes, one of the things that it provides is being able to have kind of take a snapshot, take a photograph of your organizational landscape. So this is an example of what that could look like, where we might have some part of the organization. Obviously, here we're talking about 5 teams only, where I have a platform that's being used, consumed, services are being consumed by this stream-aligned team in the middle. And I have another stream-aligned team that is collaborating for a period of time with a complicated subsystem team. Perhaps we need to solve some problems that we're seeing when we use the complicated subsystem, or we need some new functionality that the complicated subsystem team is going to implement, collaborating with the stream team that needs it. And we have some enabling team facilitating around some domain that might be test automation for iOS, for example. Some domain where the stream team needs help. So again, this is a snapshot. We expect this to go on for a period of time, and afterwards that perhaps complicated subsystem will have a new version that is stable again, and we're just consuming X as a service. So from our experience consulting and looking at other organizations' reports, we think these are kind of the 4 fundamental topologies that you need, and the 3 core interaction modes needed to build and run modern software systems. So essentially, we've looked at a little bit today at this parts or aspects of team topologies around 4 fundamental topologies, interactions, and also a little bit how this will evolve over time. It's not a fixed model or a fixed structure that you say, if I have these teams have these roles, then I'm in the right place, which is sometimes the problem with those big reorgs around Agile DevOps. Again, they bring value and they improve ways of working, but we shouldn't fixate on whatever model, Spotify model, or some kind of model that we assume this is the right thing to do, because we're going to have to evolve over time. And the gaps that we see today that we're going to address are going to be become different gaps in the future, and the needs that the market is asking for are going to change. Technology is evolving, and so we might need to adopt some new technology so that we can leverage that and not, stay attached to technology that is not being evolved anymore. Obviously, there are other aspects that we talk about in the book that we need to consider, but for the purpose of the talk today, that would be too much. But things like Conway's law, understanding the mirroring effect between the software design and the communication structures between teams, the idea of team APIs, making much clearer how does different teams prefer to work, communicate, if they have some kind of inner source model, how does that work or not? All this information should become much clearer. A few kind of key points that we didn't address today that are important, but if you think about cognitive load, obviously the software size needs to be adequate for the team that's going to handle it. Avoid those mismatches around Conway's law. So if we have very different team organization and structures compared to the software architecture that we want to achieve, then we're going to get into issues there and conflicts. Becoming this kind of organization that is able to sense when it needs to evolve, when there are new gaps or interactions that are not taking place as we expected, and so we need to think about why is that, what we need to change. And also the idea of the thinnest viable platform, which is trying to be a kind of catchy way to say, your platform should be as small as you need. If we start building more and more services without clear customer needs, we're just going to get to this bloated platform where it's going to be difficult to keep a good quality of service for all these different services in the platform. So we should try to be more focused on the services in the platform that are really providing most value for your stream teams or product teams. So I'm getting to the end. This is a slide just with some of the talks I mentioned from different organizations and several that around platforms in organizations, creating platform teams and how they're doing that, and some around project to product idea. DevOpstopologies.com, if you haven't seen that, it's kind of the predecessor, if you like, of the book Team Topologies. Is an online catalog. So if you're starting, it might be an interesting starting point, entry point to look at different ways that we can set up teams specifically for DevOps. But it's kind of a static view, if you like. So Team Topologies then brings the dynamics and the evolutionary approach to team structures and topologies. The book that I mentioned it was published by IT Revolution Press, so you might have heard about other books from IT Revolution, like the Phoenix Project. There's a book called Project to Product, which is also quite interesting. Other books from Jim Kim, the Accelerate book I mentioned is also from IT Revolution. So you can see they're mostly around this domain of the intersection of organization and software and teams and so on. We are working right now, me and Matthew Skelton, my co-author, we're working on a free workbook, specific, obviously related to the current pandemic and the fact that many teams working remotely are facing difficulties in the interactions with other teams. So if teams that were struggling in the office space, it's just going to get worse in the remote world. So the idea of this workbook is taking some techniques from team topologies and applying that and giving more kind of worked examples around how this can help in the remote first world right now. So that should be coming out in June, first half of June. It will be a free PDF. So if you follow me or Matthew, or if you look at if you follow IT Revolution Press, then you'll get the news about that. We've also, like many others, moved all our training online. So we now have a set of half-day courses online, interactive. So with us around different aspects that we talked about today, and many others as well. We also do remote-friendly assessments. I don't know if some of the people, because I was talking with Eduardo and the other organizers before the talk, and it seems like the people from different roles, and I find the format of this meetup interesting because it's bringing kind of more high-level organizational or product views and more technical views. So that's quite interesting because we need both, right? And so if people are more coming from project management background or product management, we also have this self-paced online course as well, and there's a discount for a period of time. Which could be interesting for people who want to understand how does team topologies influence kind of the product/project management aspect. Again, on the remote first side, we have some resources available online. So there's a webinar we did around this, so kind of a short version of the workbook, if you like, and other resources and some repositories in GitHub that can be helpful with some templates for Team API, for platform templates, and so on. That's it. I went a bit longer than expected, but thank you very much for listening. And I have about 10 minutes before I have to feed the kids. So si queréis en castellano sin problema, o en portugués o inglés.
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias, Manuel. Creo que, había una pregunta de José Manuel Beas que comenta que le gustaría, a ver si le podrías explicar qué podríamos entender por organizational sensing. O sea, ¿cómo lo traducirías o a qué te refieres?
Sí, o sea, hay varias cosas que podemos mirar para entender, tener una idea, una alerta, si queréis, de algo deberíamos cambiar porque ya no estamos consiguiendo corresponder a lo que necesitamos hacer. Hay varias maneras de mirarlo. O sea, una cosa es las interacciones entre equipos, una vez que están más clarificados, que sabemos, bueno, vamos a colaborar, por ejemplo, 2 semanas para descubrir cómo debería ser el servicio de centralized logging, algo así. Y al final nos toma mucho más tiempo y nos toma 2 meses o 3 meses. A lo mejor hay algo que tenemos que mirar. A lo mejor es porque los equipos de stream no tienen el conocimiento necesario sobre centralized logging para incluso entender lo que necesitan. Y a lo mejor hace falta un equipo de enabling antes de ponerlo en la plataforma. O otra vez es un servicio que creemos que es estable, fácil de entender, pero luego empezamos a tener muchos pedidos de ayuda o de que los equipos no entienden cómo funciona esto o me da problemas. Entonces, a lo mejor este servicio no es tan fiable, tan estable como pensamos. Tenemos que volver a colaborar con algunos de estos equipos para mejorarlo. O sea, eso es una manera, mirar las interacciones y donde hay problemas. También podemos mirar un poco, por ejemplo, a nivel cuando, por ejemplo, una startup que está creciendo, típicamente hay una frontera, si quieres, cuando llegamos a 40, 50, 60 personas en que las dinámicas cambian. Ya no es tan fácil compartir información entre todos, ya no es tan fácil entender quién es responsable por qué, y será probablemente un momento de repensar. Por desgracia, en mi opinión, muchas veces esas startups miran a las grandes compañías y empiezan a crear departamentos de funcionales, de seguridad, de QA, de todas estas cosas. Y luego eso más tarde tiene impacto en su capacidad de entregar, la velocidad de entrega y la calidad, y etcétera. Entonces no es una respuesta alargada porque no es una sola cosa, pero es realmente que la organización entienda que tiene que ir evoluyendo, que no hay este end state de decir, bueno, ahora estamos bien, ahora es todo va genial porque tenemos nuestros equipos agile o DevOps, etc. Es que es más que eso, hay que entender más como un organismo, la organización que tiene que ir evoluyendo y estar atento a esas alertas, si queréis, o señales de que algo debería cambiar.
Vale. Yo tenía una pregunta, no sé si hay alguna más en el canal. Bueno, me parece que no. Entonces aprovecho yo para preguntar, en tu experiencia, ¿qué ratio sueles encontrar entre equipos de producto versus tamaño de equipo de plataforma? O sea, a partir de qué momento suele ser, ya sé que cada experiencia es un poco diferente, ¿no? Pero habrás visto bastantes situaciones, pues, ¿cuál es el ratio o a partir de qué tamaños empieza a surgir esa necesidad?
Es que depende mucho también de la maturidad de los equipos, pero hay ejemplos que han funcionado bien de tener más o menos como un equipo de plataforma pequeño de 5 personas para 50 ingenieros en equipos de ingenieros y otros roles en equipos de producto. Depende mucho. Realmente lo que intento recomendar es que no fijarnos tanto en la escala, en los ratios, porque luego hay también, casos en que se piensa que, bueno, cuando lleguemos a X personas, entonces creamos la plataforma. Esto va mucho más de cambiar el mindset. Sé que esto suena súper cliché, pero cambiar la manera de cómo entendemos la plataforma. Eso intenté explicar en la presentación, de que si es un producto y además tenemos clientes internos, pues tenemos que ir desarrollando esta manera de entender la plataforma como un producto y de dirigirnos a las necesidades de nuestras equipas internas, de nuestros clientes internos. Y esto toma tiempo también, porque lo que he visto es incluso ejemplos donde han mirado a Team Topology y han dicho, bueno, necesitamos equipo de plataforma. Y eso está bien, pero luego se han dedicado demasiado a desarrollar servicios. y luego los equipos de producto tenían muchos problemas, muchas dificultades en entender cómo usar esos servicios de la plataforma. Entonces no es tanto una cuestión de volumen, es más empezar, porque todas las organizaciones tienen una plataforma. Aunque seamos una startup que usa AWS todo el rato, eso es nuestra plataforma. Puede ser solo una página wiki que dice, pues usamos este servicio de AWS y hay que tener en cuenta estas configuraciones y tener cuidado con esto y esto. Pues ya está, es la plataforma, es esa definición. Pero típicamente, cuando crece la organización, la plataforma interna va creciendo. Y lo más importante es construir ese mindset y cambiar un poco la idea de que somos equipos que van simplemente entregar servicios técnicos y no tenemos que preocuparnos con la usabilidad, la documentación también, porque esa es parte de la usabilidad, de tener ejemplos sencillos de cómo usar los servicios, etc. Pero bueno, me he alargado un poco, porque creo que es importante empezar con la plataforma, definir y luego ir creciendo la plataforma poco a poco. Pero hay ejemplos de todo, de eso, de equipos de plataforma muy eficientes con 5 o 6 personas pueden ya ayudar mucho, y hay ejemplos donde tienen equipos de 50, 100 personas en la plataforma, pero probablemente no están, no estarán interagiendo posiblemente en la mejor manera con los equipos de producto.
Muchas gracias. Creo que, Rafa, tú tenías una pregunta también y no sé si queda otra en el chat, que no sé si nos va a dar tiempo, pero bueno, luego si no te la envío después, Manuel.
Hola, Manuel. Yo tengo una pregunta y es si crees, es algo que yo he visto a menudo, pero si tú también crees que las empresas no dan la importancia suficiente al team setup inicial, al entrenamiento y a la configuración inicial del equipo, porque en mi opinión, y es una pregunta que te hago, si se hace un entrenamiento adecuado y una configuración del equilibrio de seniority dentro del equipo y de skills dentro del equipo, muy probablemente los enabling teams, incluso platform teams necesarios para habilitar ese equipo serían menores, ¿no?
Sí, totalmente de acuerdo. No solo inicialmente, pero incluso durante la vida, digamos, de los equipos, muchas veces pensamos, bueno, son equipos técnicos, la aprenden solos, pero no hay tiempo y muchas veces hay que ir por atajos y no aprender de verdad las prácticas que son necesarias. Y estoy, totalmente de acuerdo. Si ya empieza el equipo con es que muchas veces simplemente, bueno, ahora sois un equipo autónomo, pero ¿eso qué quiere decir? Eso tienes que dar las herramientas que son estos otros equipos y servicios que permitan a un dado equipo ser autónomo en la entrega de valor, pero no es que puedas saber de todo.
Vale, muchísimas gracias. Bueno, quedan un par de preguntas que si quieres te las envío después, por si las quieres contestar, o no sé,
si
porque
quieres
creo que andabas. Vale.
Sí,
mira,
contestar rápidamente.
Vale, pues Roberto Cascón nos saber cuál es su opinión de cómo podemos darnos cuenta si la cantidad de equipos enablers o de plataforma que tenemos son los adecuados o, por el contrario, son más o menos de los que deberíamos tener para una entrega óptima de valor.
Deberían ser los necesarios. Otra vez no es muy de tener una cifra, pero sí que es entender cuáles son los gaps, cuáles son las dificultades de los equipos y tener los enabling o platform services que sean necesarios. Entonces, nuevamente, es regularmente entender en qué punto estamos y ver qué nos hace falta. O sea, para dar un ejemplo, que muchas organizaciones están adoptando Kubernetes o Kubernetes o como queréis pronunciar. Si simplemente decimos, bueno, ahora es esta la tecnología y los equipos se tienen que adaptar y entender, pues eso aumenta drásticamente el cognitive load para esos equipos. Y entonces necesitamos o a lo mejor un equipo de enabling o un equipo de plataforma que pueda trabajar como enabling también para ayudar a los equipos de producto a entender, primero reducir lo que tienen que saber, darles abstracciones y luego ayudarles a entender cómo funciona. Entonces, siempre un poco eso, no es tanto si son demasiados o si faltan equipos de enabling platform, pero más de cuáles son las necesidades, si estamos cubriendo o no.
Muchas gracias. Pues bueno, queda una última, lo intentamos. Bueno, también no sé por si la gente quiere para aplaudir, pero bueno, yo te la voy lanzando. ¿Cómo mides el cognitive load en las 3 verticales que se han comentado en el slide? ¿Y cómo actúa en base al feedback de las métricas que se usen? No sé si entiendo yo muy bien.
Sí, la primera parte, pues el cognitive load, en GitHub tenemos algunos repositorios, github.com /team topologies, y uno de ellos es un Team Cognitive Load Assessment. Realmente no es dirigido, o sea, no va por los 3 tipos de cognitive load, pero sí las distintas áreas de que tiene que conocer el equipo, o sea, como eso, la experiencia para hacer el build de vuestros servicios, de hacer testing, hacer deployment, monitorizar, etc. Entonces, un ejemplo de que podemos hacer unos surveys muy sencillos internamente para entender para cada equipo cuáles son los problemas que tienen. ¿Por qué no? También no es una cifra, no es decir, pues el cognitive load es 90 y debería ser 70. Es entender qué está afectando a los equipos, qué está causando más problemas, porque esos equipos y luego ver qué es lo más común entre varios equipos, ¿no? Entonces, mirar el repositorio en GitHub, Team Cognitive Load Assessment, que es solo un ejemplo, una idea, pero con algo tan sencillo como eso, podemos mirar y ver dónde hay más problemas, qué son el tipo de capacidades que faltan a los equipos y que deberíamos ayudarles.
De acuerdo, pues bueno, pues muchísimas gracias. Bueno, entiendo igual que las slides o demás, pues igual se pueden poner ahí por Twitter. Y,
sí, bueno, lo pongo en SlideShare y lo pongo por Twitter y LinkedIn, y si queréis os envío también.